All right, in this video I'm just going to go through some questions that should be raised about the function argument. The first question has to do with how we understand the argument. And that question I'm calling uniqueness or characterization. So here's the question. Aristotle says that the good for a human being, it's good for you to have, what makes your life go well, is to fulfill your function. Everything has its function. But sometimes it sounds like he's saying everything has a unique function, something that sets it apart from everything else. And sometimes he says something has a characteristic function. A characteristic function need not be unique. People can share characteristics, right? So if someone were to say, describe you, describe your personality, they could describe you in terms that would be accurate. They would give an accurate description of your personality, how you tend to behave, what's characteristic of you. But that characteristics or that set of characteristics could be true of other people too. It wouldn't make you unique, right? So if someone were to say that you were funny when things get awkward, right? So that when awkward situations arise, you're the person who can be relied upon to sort of lighten the mood or improve the situation and the atmosphere by telling a good joke, right? That could be characteristic of you. It could be revealing about you in some deep way. Maybe it shows that you're uncomfortable with awkward situations. Maybe it shows that you're socially adept and able to guide other people really well, like a natural leader or something like that. But it needn't set you apart from every other person in the world. It doesn't make you unique. Lots of people are funny when things get awkward. Right? So to put this into terms Aristotle would have been happier with, given his focus on biology. If you were to describe the function of a lion and a tiger, what would they be? Right? It seems like you would say the same thing. Right? It seems like when it comes to those two animals, you're not going to be able to come up with a unique function for each of them. That lions and tigers have basically the same function. I mean, effectively, they they play the same role in the food chain and in the overall ecology in the environments where they're found. That's why you don't find lions and tigers living in the same place, except for at those weird big cat zoos that everybody's going crazy about on the internet right now. Right now, the Joe Exotic Netflix cat show is all the rage on the internet. There are characteristic functions of lions and tigers. They're the same function. Right? That said, he very often, Aristotle, sounds like he means unique function, the thing that sets human beings apart from everything else. And the way this plays a role is the characteristic function of human beings will seem like it leaves more room for non-rational elements than does the unique function. Aristotle's very clear that rationality, it seems to him, is something unique to human beings, or unique to human beings and divine beings with whom we don't interact. Right? But in the natural world, we're the only rational beings. And so the more you lean on uniqueness as the requirement for a function, something's function has to set it apart from everything else, has to make it unique, the more you're going to say rationality plays a role. But if you're going with characteristic function, rather than unique function, then it seems like there's all sorts of things that we share with animals and plants that could be part of our function, part of us performing our function well will be doing the kinds of things animals and plants do quite often. Right? This is especially important when it relates to sort of the role of our body in our life. Right? Aristotle would not have thought that there was something non-physical about your mind in general. So it's not like he thinks that just because he's talking about rationality, he's not talking about your body, but he's certainly not talking about most of your body, right? Like your hands aren't involved in rationality. Somebody could cut your hands off and you'd still be just as rational as you were before. But on a more important level, there are aspects of our lives that are really important, that have like everything to do with our body and everything to do with the aspects of our body that we share with animals, right? So our sexual nature is like that. The more you lean on uniqueness, the more you're going to focus on the things that sets us apart from animals, and the less you're going to focus on things that we have in common with animals. And in general, Aristotle usually wants to draw connections between human beings and animals. He doesn't have this idea that we are usually anyway, set apart, right, from other animals. He investigates us the same way he does all the animals he investigates in his many biological works. So there's this tension here. The view he settles on in book one does seem to lean more and go more in the uniqueness direction, but it seems to many people that describing it as the characteristic function makes more sense. All right, so that's the first question. Not one I'm going to resolve in this video, just one I want to make you aware of. Second question has to do with the rational part. Right? So your soul has a rational part to it, and this is what makes virtue a life lived in accordance with reason, or lived through reason, or by reason. But there are two aspects to reason according to Aristotle. There's practical reason and theoretical reason. Practical reason is what you employ, or is reason when it's being employed to answer practical questions. Practical questions are questions about what to do, how to behave, right? How to live your life. Theoretical questions are questions about what the nature of the universe is. Right? So when you're asking theoretical questions, you're basically being a scientist. You're using your rational nature to facilitate asking and answering scientific questions. Whereas when you're engaging with practical reason, you're just being like a normal human being. Right? And so there's this question, which aspect of reason is the more important, or are they equally important, when it comes to determining what the good life is for human beings? And this question can actually be seen to relate somewhat to the earlier question about uniqueness or characterization. If you were talking about human beings in general, then practical reason, I don't know why that just happened, practical reason would seem to characterize us more, if only because every human being engages in practical reason, and plenty of human beings don't engage in theoretical reason much at all. Right? Lots of people don't spend their time pondering the deepest secrets of the universe. So if you're just trying to characterize what human beings are like, you'd probably focus more on practical reason than theoretical reason. However, if you were focusing on what makes human beings unique, well, then theoretical reason is like the best thing you could pick. It is somewhat doubtful. Aristotle maybe didn't doubt it, but we know more than he does, or we know more than he did. It's very doubtful that there are no animals that engage in practical reasoning. There's all sorts of evidence from studies of animal intelligence that animals engage in practical reason, not as well as us. Like, they're not as good at it as we are, but they're doing it, right? They're making plans, they're making tools. Even birds can make tools, right? Or certain kinds of birds can make tools. And it's just not plausible, right, that a lot of these animals that have like complex hunting strategies, group hunting strategies, like dolphins or wolves do, are just not engaged in practical reasoning at all. But here's what certainly seems true. Animals don't show any signs of engaging in theoretical reason. There's no animals doing science. Right? So if you're leaning more in uniqueness, theoretical reason is going to seem more important. And if you're leaning more in characterization as an account of what our function is, then maybe practical reason will matter more. Right? Maybe that will be the kind of reasoning that's key to a happy life. This question, practical reason or theoretical reason, relates very closely to two of the lives, the life of public virtue and the life of contemplation, that Aristotle discusses throughout this book. He's been doing it all through book one. He's going to keep doing it all the way through all of the books of the Nicomachean Ethics. Practical reason seems like it's playing a larger role in a life of public virtue, and theoretical reason seems like it's playing a larger role in the life of contemplation. It seems very clear that Aristotle is aware of this question and is somewhat torn in the exact same way that Plato was. So remember that in the way the story of the cave goes, somebody gets out of the cave, they make it to the real world, and then Plato says you have to go back down. You have to go back down into the cave and try to free others from the life they lead, chained by deception. You have to give up the life spent living among the real world, which, when you get rid of the allegory and say what Plato really means, seems to be a life spent considering and thinking about the forms, the fundamental nature of reality. You have to give up that life of contemplation in return so that you can engage in a life of public virtue where you're trying to help the other people in your society. This is the part of Plato where he comes closest seemingly to abandoning eudaimonism, to abandoning the view that what is rational for us to do is always what's in our own best interest, because it does seem like he's saying it's in the best interest of the individual to stay up top and out of the cave, but that they nonetheless have reason to go back down into the cave. So this contrast between the life of public virtue and the life of contemplation was one that Plato was aware of. It seemed to be one that even Socrates was aware of. If you go back into the Apology, Socrates says very clearly he chose not to engage in politics. He chose to avoid that part of life so that he could pursue philosophy more. Now, Socrates' kind of philosophy was an engaged public kind of philosophy. He was going around talking to people all the time. So it's not quite as clear that Socrates was aware of this conflict as Aristotle was or Plato was, but definitely Plato and Aristotle are both alive to the idea that there's this tension between the life of public virtue and the life of contemplation. And that shows up in the function argument, because the function argument says, well, our function is to live a life according to reason, but which kind of reason? Practical reason or theoretical reason? The third question I want to ask about this, just to bring to your attention, is the question I have at number 3, good for a human being or good human being? So think about the kinds of examples that Aristotle's using to motivate the function argument, right? That you take different people being good at their job. What is that? What makes them good at their job? What makes someone a good saddle maker? Well, they make good saddles. The function of a saddle maker is to make saddles, so doing that well is what makes you a good saddle maker. And you think of some of the examples I used. What makes something a good car? Well, a car has a certain kind of function. Performing that function well makes it a good car. And so it seems like what Aristotle's saying is, okay, the function argument identifies what could make you a good human being. But it seems like there's a difference between being a good human being and something being good for a human being. Something might be good for you, but not make you a better human being, in that it benefits you, but it doesn't improve you. That seems possible, right? Like if I just show up one day at your door and I drop off like a bunch of video games and you have a good time playing those video games, have I made you a better human being? No. But have I done something good for you? Yeah. I mean, that's presumably why you said thank you. And of course you said thank you because you're a polite person. So it seems like you can have something that's good for you, that benefits you, makes things go better for you, but that doesn't make you a better human being. Similarly, if you think about those examples, right, there's such a thing as being a good car. There's such a thing as being a good, let's use the car, in fact. A car has a function. A car can perform that function well. It can perform it poorly. When it performs it well, it's a good car. That doesn't mean driving fast or having an engine that can go fast. That doesn't mean having good safety features is good for the car, right? It doesn't benefit the car. It doesn't make the car's life go better. The car doesn't have a life. The very fact that non-living things can have a function, right? And the very fact that some living things that have a function don't have anything recognizable as a life. Like a tree is alive, but it's weird to say that a tree has a life. When we say that something has a life, we kind of mean like, well, there's kind of a story of their life. There's no story of a tree's life. I mean, I guess there's a boring story like acorn, growth, death. That's the story, right? Something can be a good car, can be a good hammer, it can be a good tree, right? Without that necessarily being good for that thing. Because some things that can be good versions of what they are, there's no such thing as benefiting them. Things can't go better or worse for them, right? Things can't go better or worse for a car. A Cars just are, right? There's no such thing as a good for them. There is such a thing as being a good car versus a bad car, but there's no such thing as being a good for a car. Right? And what the question originally was, at the beginning of Nicomachean Ethics, was what's good for us? Because it's the thing, Aristotle wants to identify the thing we're all pursuing. In everything we do in our lives, we're pursuing that goal. We're pursuing that good, right? That is supposed to be the ultimate final good. And he says the function argument is the way to do that. And you might think that there's a confusion here, that the function argument can identify what makes us a good human being, but it doesn't, at least, it doesn't obviously anyway, identify what's good for us. Now, I don't want to put too much stress on this criticism. This is something to be aware of. It's not necessarily something Aristotle overlooked. In fact, it's very unlikely Aristotle wasn't aware of the difference between these two ideas. And the reason why is that the difference between these two ideas, or the potential difference between these two ideas, is essentially the entire motivation for Plato's Republic. One way of putting what Glaucon and Adeimantus are demanding of Socrates in that book is, can you show us how what makes you a good human being, what makes you virtuous, will also be good for you? Right? Can you show us how being just will benefit us? Can you show us how being a good human being, right, will at the same time be good for the human being who is a good human being? The fact that Plato answers, yes, that's true. What's good for you will also be the same thing as being a good version of yourself, means that Aristotle was aware of the idea that these two things could go together. But the fact that Plato treated it as a question also means that Aristotle would have been aware that these two things, at least at the beginning, or conceptually anyway, are not the same thing, right? Because it's not like Glaucon and Adeimantus were just confused, right? Good for a human being, good human being are different ideas. Plato has to make an argument to show that, well, actually they go together. But that doesn't mean they're the exact same thing. And the worry you might have is the function argument is only good at identifying what makes for a good human being, meaning that Aristotle would still have to do all the same work that Plato did to show that one of these gets you the other. So that's just something to be aware of the remainder of your reading of this book. Final thing I want to point out is some of the arguments Aristotle's making, the arguments by analogy, are troublesome, and there's one that's troublesome in particular. He compares a human being to organs of a human being. So he points out that like various parts of your body have a function, right? Your liver has a function. Your liver that is there to process poisons, basically, toxins that get into your system, get them out of your bloodstream so they don't kill you. Your stomach has a function. It's to digest. Your various sensory organs have functions to take in information. And Aristotle says, or suggests an argument, it doesn't come quite out and make this explicit, but there's the suggestion of an argument that, well, I mean, it would be weird if every part of us had a function, but we don't, like the whole of us doesn't. But of course, the way that organs get their function is by playing a certain role in an organism of which they are a part. Right? So like the liver wouldn't have a function if it was off on its own. It wouldn't even really be a liver. It would just be like a liver-shaped bunch of potassium and carbon and nitrogen and stuff, right? Is there anything analogous to the whole human body of which we're a part? Some people have thought yes, and some people have thought Aristotle might be suggesting that the answer is yes. What would that thing be? Well, society. We're a part of society the way organs are a part of the body. Now, Aristotle doesn't come out and say this, especially not in the function argument section of this book, but it has appealed to certain people. It's a dangerous argument, though, because, of course, your organs only have value to the extent that they contribute to things going well for the whole body. And we know that because when we have organs that don't do that, like the appendix, we take that thing right out of there as soon as it looks troublesome. But it's ethically a problematic thing to say that we should like eliminate individuals when they stop seeming useful to society. And there's a question whether these implicit arguments by analogy that Aristotle's making, comparing us to body parts or comparing us to professions, right? Like the profession of being a saddle maker only has the function it does and only has value in the context of a wider economic system that makes use of saddles, right? There are all sorts of professions that used to exist but now don't because technology changed and there's now no longer any role for those professions in the economy. There's still a role for saddle maker, but there's all sorts of roles, jobs that used to exist for like building ships. We just don't build ships the same way anymore. So lots of the jobs that people used to have in ancient Greece, building these big wooden triremes, well, we don't build triremes anymore because compared to modern boats, triremes suck, right? We are not, rather, there are important ways in which we are not analogous to professions or organs because they only get their value from being part of a wider system. And most of us think, well, that's not true of us. I have value independent of the society I live in. I have value independent of the group. That kind of individualistic approach to morality is one that sometimes doesn't quite fit well with the Greeks. This was not nearly as popular in ancient Greece as it was or as it would come to be in the modern period, as we'll see with the two modern authors we're going to read later on. All right, so this has been a video finishing up the function argument, and lasts about 20 minutes, so hopefully it was valuable.